Despite the latest Glasgow commitments, scientists warn the Earth's average global temperature is on track to exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next 20 years. That's if the world continues on the current path without a drastic and urgent cut to our carbon emissions. About 3 hours from Melbourne, just off the Great Ocean Road, is an unassuming test site. In terms of reducing emissions, there's two main schools of thought. Don't produce them in the first place, or capture CO2 and store it underground, which is the promise of carbon capture and storage, which is what we're here today to see. CCS is one of 7 priority technologies listed in the federal government's long-term emissions reduction plan.
We have safely stored 100,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide.
During the process, carbon dioxide is separated from natural gas. The CO2 is pumped and stored underground.
The panel that we have over here is actually directly connected to pressure and temperature gauges located about 1,500 metres down each of the wells that we have outside.
The Otway International Test Centre is run by CO2 CRC, a not-for-profit organisation that's received more than $100 million in government funding and a similar amount since 2011 from some of the world's largest oil and gas companies.
The industry has significant investment in this technology because it does help to deeply decarbonise quickly and permanently.
So what do you say to people that when you hear them say that carbon capture and storage doesn't work?
Well, I think we've proven it here on site, Andy. And not only can I say is it safe, but it's reliable and it's necessary.
We cannot achieve net zero without carbon capture and storage.
CCS at the moment in Australia is simply used as a potential lifesaver for the fossil fuel industry. And that is deceptive. For climate change, we need to have CCS to draw down CO2, not to make a very polluting emission source less polluting. That is not good enough anymore, and that is also not economically good enough.
Carbon capture and storage isn't new.
Our traditional fossil fuel energy plants will be transformed.
15 years ago, it was synonymous with so-called clean coal.
Australia must aspire to be a world leader in clean coal technology.
Nobody uses the term anymore because everybody can see behind it.
Climate scientists like Dr. Malte Meinshausen, a lead author with the IPCC, sees CCS as a powerful tool when used with emerging technologies that draw CO2 directly out of the atmosphere.
CCS is part of the solution mix. However, CCS is not part of the solution mix in combination with fossil fuels. The net effect is still extra emissions to the atmosphere, so that is not the solution.
It's accepted across the world now that this is an important technology. It comes in many different forms, and we are seeing projects happening here in Australia, the largest of its kind here in Australia.
Here we go! All right!
The Chevron-operated Gorgon gas plant in Western Australia was approved in 2006 on the condition it prevented at least 80% of reservoir CO2 from being emitted to the atmosphere.
It was highly controversial that Gorgon were allowed to build an LNG plant there, and this CO2 injection condition was absolutely fundamental to that project going ahead, and they've missed the mark by a mile.
Peter Milne worked as an economic analyst for Chevron during the initial phase of the Gorgon project, which has the largest CCS system in the world, costing $3 billion and aiming to permanently store up to 4 million tonnes of CO2 underground each year.
In its first 5 years of operation, only about a third of that CO2 has been buried in the CO2 injection system because they've had so many technical problems.
Chevron told the Federal Department of Industry last year that the project would generate 2,600 jobs and boost Australia's GDP by $687 billion over 4 decades.
If that system had worked properly from day one, it would have avoided 10 million tonnes of CO2 being vented to the atmosphere. And 10 million tonnes of CO2 is almost as much as 3 years of WA's biggest coal-fired power station.
Chevron has agreed to buy carbon credits and invest in low emissions technologies to make up for missing its CO2 storage target. Chevron told 730 the CCS system is working and it's carefully ramping up injection rates. What does the failure and the cost of Gorgon, which resulted in an extra 10 million tonnes of CO2 being released into the environment, what does that say about CCS technology, and does it not dampen your enthusiasm for it?
Look, there are 37 million tonnes a year of emissions being abated through CCS now, today, as we speak. And that is growing at a rapid pace. There are some in Australia who don't want to see us succeed because their objective is not to bring down emissions, it's to destroy some of Australia's traditional resource industries.
Critics of carbon capture and storage say that it won't store enough CO2 to avoid climate disaster, and that it's an expensive and uneconomic use of taxpayers' money which is going to the fossil fuel companies. Advocates say that it will help preserve jobs in those resources sectors and help us to continue exporting gas as we transition to net zero.
There's no question that the technology works. It's purely a question of economics.
I see this challenge as quite simple.
Santos CEO Kevin Gallagher was at the Prime Minister's side at COP26 to promote his company's Moomba CCS project in South Australia.
Whereas Gorgon is injecting into what's known as a saline aquifer offshore, our project is injecting into the depleted reservoirs. We estimate our storage capacity at Moomba to be around 20 million tonnes per annum for more than 50 years.
The reason that the oil and gas industry inject carbon dioxide underground has nothing to do with reducing emissions. It's a 50-year-old dirty oil extraction process called enhanced oil recovery.
It's a claim Santos denies.
What I can guarantee is that Phase 1 project is focused only on storage. I'm not going to talk about future projects elsewhere or any other projects, but for this project, I can guarantee that we're only capturing gas to permanently store it underground.
We all agree a low-carbon future is essential.
Santos has rebranded itself as a clean energy company, a claim the Australasian Centre of Corporate Responsibility is challenging in court.
We allege in the federal court that Santos has engaged in misleading and deceptive conduct by failing to disclose sufficient information to shareholders to assess its claim that it has a clear and credible pathway to net zero emissions by 2040. That claim rests heavily on carbon capture and storage, and we allege in the case that this amounts to greenwashing.
We've just taken final investment decision on a $220 million CCS project in the Cooper Basin. That's hardly greenwashing. That's a real project.
Do you think Australia will continue to expand gas projects and to export gas?
Well, our own modelling tells us that gas is going to continue to play an important role for many, many years to come, and that demand from whether it's Japan or Korea or China or India will continue for many years to come because this is a fuel that helps us through the transition.
So while the rest of the world looks to zero carbon technologies, we're burying our carbon in the ground. Is that the best we can do?
The rest of the world is looking to CCS as one of the portfolio of technologies. I've already said that to you. IPCC, IEA, the UK, the US.
The IPCC says that direct air capture, but not fossil fuel abatement specifically. And the IEA says no new oil and gas projects. How does that marry up with our Paris Agreement goals and commitments?
I'll say it again. The IPCC, the IEA, the US President, the UK government, all committed to CCS as part of the mix. All of them.
Critics say the track record of carbon capture and storage speaks for itself.
Carbon capture and storage is a disaster in terms of reducing emissions, but it's a huge success in terms of public relations. And companies like Santos, who want to continue expanding, need to have some kind of cover to do that.
For the next 10, 15 years, the production is going to be pretty strong and pretty stable of gas. What CCS allows us to do is cut the emissions from that production today.
What do you say to Australians who might think that emissions reduction has become, under your leadership, a byword for emissions continuation?
Well, it's not. I mean, CCS is about reducing emissions. Low emission steel and aluminium are about reducing emissions. Soil carbon is about reducing emissions. Our objective is purely to get emissions down, to get to net zero. And we'll deploy whatever technology we can to get there.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.